So guys, welcome to video 5 in the Introduction to Human Resource Management series. In video 1, we talked about the evolution of human resource management through the years. In the second video, we talked about strategic human resource management. We indicated that strategic human resource management came about to help the organization solve problems and increase their competitiveness, and also take advantage of the new learning that was taking place in the field of human resource management. In the third video, we talked about human resource planning, and we talked about the various activities involved in planning for human resources at the organization to ensure that the right persons are in the organization with the right set of skills. In the fourth video, we talked about recruitment and selection and various approaches to ensuring persons are within the organization or within the respective departments that would allow them to be effective. In this video, we recognize that we may bring persons into the organizations and they may not necessarily have the knowledge, skills, abilities, and other attributes that are required. There are different categories of learning in which they would have to undergo. There are different categories of training that the organization may have to carry out in order to ensure the effectiveness of the workforce, and that is what we'll be talking about in today's video. So we're looking at training and development. Remember, we're looking at Introduction to Human Resource Management from the perspective that we have the opportunity to support our organization in improving their HR practices, or support an organization that may invite us to be a part of their transformation. So we're looking at it from a practical perspective and not so much just discussing the theory of human resource management. So today we want to talk about training and development, and we're going to start our conversation on human resource development. So what is human resource development? It's a set of systematic and planned activities designed by an organization to provide members of staff with opportunities for learning consistent with their day-to-day requirements and the long-term strategies and objectives of the organization. Remember, we say that everything starts with the long-term objectives and strategies in order to ensure the efficient and effective use of resources. Now, why would human resource development be necessary? We talked about that. As a result of the competitive pressures facing organizations, they require staff members to have the knowledge to be able to generate the ideas that would allow the organization to function at optimal capacity, to treat with the emergent and the changing needs of its clients and customers, as well as to be able to withstand the efforts of their competitors as they attempt to deliver results for a shrinking market in the sense that more and more persons are coming into the field to provide those resources, so the market is shrinking in that regard. So what is training? It's the process whereby people acquire the capabilities to perform current jobs. Training provides employees with specific knowledge, skills, abilities, and other attributes for use in their present job. And within the organization, we could be talking from the perspective of hard skills or soft skills. When we say hard skills, we're talking about the specialized knowledge, the technical knowledge that is required, that a person may either acquire through being on the job day to day or through training workshops provided by the Human Resource Development Unit. And it could be such skills as teaching sales representative how to use specific types of resources, technology, new technology that the organization may bring in. It could be from the perspective of teaching an apprentice how to use a specific set of tools within the organization. That's hard skills. It could even include teaching a manager how to review an income statement. Things like that would be hard skills. And then you'd have soft skills, which aim to improve the intra and interpersonal dynamics of the individual, assist with making intelligent decisions, assist with problem solving, assist with mentoring another colleague, assist with setting up a meeting, or generally just improving communication within the organization with individuals, managing conflicts, etc. So training is useful from the perspective of the hard skills and the soft skills. As I indicated, there are various categories of learning that the new hire would have to undertake. And these would include preliminary learning, what one needs to learn within the organization. So the induction process, as we mentioned in the recruitment and selection video, the induction process is a means of easing the employee into the organization, making the employee become aware of those things that they would have to learn. There would be a role for the human resource development officer in that regard. A second category of learning is learning about the organization. What is our mission? What's our vision? What are our goals? What are our values? What are our policies and procedure? These things an employee, a new hire, would have to learn as well. Learning to function in the work group, the roles, norms, culture, relationships, etc. So there may be various classes of employees within the organization. There may be various ranks of employees within the organization. So employees must know what are their roles in relation to their specific position, what are the norms in relation to their level of employment, what's the culture within the organization, what are the various kinds of relationships that exist within the organization. So these are critical learning elements for a new hire. Then, of course, the specialized knowledge in terms of learning how to perform the job, the technical knowledge that is required, as we just talked about, perhaps learning to use specialized equipment, perhaps learning to complete certain kinds of reports, and they can learn it on a day-to-day basis, being assisted by their peers, or they can learn it through formal workshops. And of course, personal learning. How am I developing as a person, or how am I fitting within the context of the organization? And that could be achieved through the induction follow-up process, which we again talked about in recruitment and selection. And as I indicated, there are different categories of training that would be required, and the different categories include required and regular training, which examples of that could be the organization would have to comply with various mandated legal requirements such as the OSH Act or OSHA, and this kind of training would be given to all employees at orientation. So there may be ethics training to be carried out, sexual harassment policies of the organization, equal opportunity policies of the organization. That would be required and regular training to ensure employees are aware and very familiar with those things that are required. There could be job and technical training, which would refer to the training where employees are equipped with the knowledge and skills to perform their job well. Might include product knowledge or technical processes and procedures, customer relations, for example. So that would be technical training that human resource development officers would be required to consider. Interpersonal and problem solving training, which we're talking about looking at those communication type challenges that the organization may have to overcome by ensuring that persons are trained in a particular way, conflict management, managing other employees, motivating employees, etc. And then there's developmental and career training, which is a longer term focus to enhance the individual and organizational capabilities for the future. So we talked about succession planning in a previous video. We talked about an organization preparing for change to go in a different direction. So these would come under the developmental and career training. So let's talk about the human resource development officer. Now, as a strategic partner, remember we're talking everything is strategy. As a strategic partner, the human resource development manager or the person in charge of human resource development or training and development within the organization, there are specific questions that should be asked. Based on the organizational strategic objectives, strategies and objectives, everything begins there. Is there really a need for training? So in some cases, the improvement that the organization requires may not necessarily be, training may not necessarily be the solution or the answer. In some cases, it could be improvement of processes, improvement of equipment, improvement of recruitment. So there are different areas that could be looked at and not necessarily training. So the human resource development manager must answer that question. Is there really a need for training within the organization? Based on the answer to that question, who needs to be trained? Who will do the training? Would we be developing the training ourselves? Or would we be hiring a consultant to conduct the training? Would we be vending out the training? Would we be using that kind of online form to provide the training? Would it be an online form? Would it be a workshop form? Would it be a face-to-face form? Would it be a self-paced form? Would it be overseas? So what form will the training take? Questions must be answered. How will the knowledge be transferred to the job? How would we ensure that those things that are important for immediate application to transform specific aspects of the workplace or the job, how would we ensure that those areas are transferred from the classroom to the boardroom or to the corridors or to the workspaces? How will the training be evaluated? In what ways will the training be evaluated? The human resource development manager must answer these questions. You as a human resource development manager must answer these questions in order for the training to be strategic. And to do this, you would require specific qualities as an individual. If you're making a determination that human resource development is the field that you want to get into, that if you are in the position of human resource development manager, you require certain kinds of qualities. One, you must be a training champion. And when we say a training champion, not necessarily a person who is exceptionally skilled at training, although that is indeed an asset and a requirement, but in this case we are talking about a person who would champion training within the organization, increase the relevance or the importance or the significance of training in the minds of the decision makers as well as members of staff. You have to champion training within the organization. That's a required quality. You must have a fair understanding of the systematic approach to training, and we talk about the systematic approach to training in a bit. You must be aware of principles that enhance the learning process from the perspective of learners, the environment, as well as facilitators of training. You must be aware of principles that enhance learning. You must understand instructional psychology. What would make learning easier? What would make instructing in various courses easier? It's important to understand these things. Must be skilled at training evaluation. Must be able to identify how participants feel after completing the training workshop. Must be able to identify if there has in fact been any change in behavior. Must be able to talk in terms of whether the change in behavior has resulted in a change in result, a positive change in result for the organization. So it's important to be able to evaluate the training. These are important characteristics and qualities if you intend to be involved in human resource development or training and development within the organization. So let's look at them in a little more detail. The systematic approach to training is an orderly, logical approach to determining what people must know and do at a particular job within a specific profession. It ensures that people are prepared for their work by having the necessary knowledge, skills, abilities, attitudes, and other attributes to do their job effectively. The ADDIE model is one such model of ensuring that a systematic approach to training is used. And the ADDIE model stands for analysis, analyze the organization, see what's taking place, design, development, implementation, and evaluation. And we're going to talk about these in a bit more detail now. In terms of analysis, you might ask the question, what are some of the most pressing challenges faced within the organization that can be corrected by training? In terms of analysis, what are you seeing happening in specific areas, and what do you prefer to see happen in these areas? What are the knowledge, skills, abilities, and other attributes needed in order for what you want to see to occur? So you're not satisfied with what you're seeing, you want an improved level of function. What are the KSAOs required to bring about that improved state of affairs? What are the current KSAOs within the organization? And based on what is needed and what's current, what is the gap? What are the performance appraisals saying to us within the organization? That's part of your analysis. We've conducted performance appraisal and it's saying to us that persons are deficient in specific areas. What are the metrics saying to us? Various metrics. So you could have customer satisfaction metrics. Are our customers satisfied? You could be looking at customer churn, and when we say customer churn, the rate at which customers stop doing business with us, or the rate at which we may be losing customers. What are they saying to us? How should we be behaving differently as a result of that? What is our turnover rate? Staff leaving our organization because they're not satisfied with the quality of work life, or they're not motivated to remain with the organization. So these are some of the things we would consider in looking at analysis. After analysis, we look at design. And in terms of design, we talk about there are various areas we can look at. Training logistics, what the participant would learn in the course. So we're going to take into consideration the logistics of putting the training together. We're going to take into consideration what the participant would learn as part of the course. We're going to have to talk about the instructional methods to be used to teach the course. How would participants demonstrate competency? How would we know that the training has been effective? How will the learning be transferred? And there are other decisions related to principles that enhance learning. In terms of the training logistics, we could be talking about the nature of training, the number of persons to be trained. Are we going to use an individual or a team approach? Is it going to be self-paced or guided with a facilitator in front of a group? Are we going to use e-learning or the traditional learning methods? What would be the cost of the resources that we have to acquire? What locations would we be carrying out the training in? Would we be carrying out the training in all locations or all branches? Would we be one centralized location? Would we be doing overseas training? What's the time allotted to execute the training, to deliver the training? Or what's the timeline we have for the completion of all the training? These are some of the logistics that we need to talk about in terms of training logistics, in terms of the design. Secondly, we'll talk about what the participant would learn. And in terms of what the participant would learn, we can look at it from the perspective of what is called Bloom's taxonomy. And Bloom's taxonomy talks about different domains of learning: cognitive domain, the affective domain, and the psychomotor domain. Cognitive domain is basically knowledge base. What knowledge do I want my participants to have? We're looking at what the participants would learn. What knowledge do I want them to have, such that they would be able to recall certain things at certain time, they would be able to apply certain things at certain time, they would be able to analyze certain situations. What knowledge do they need to have? That's the cognitive domain. And then you have the affective domain. How could I cause an individual to feel differently? So affective domain talks about improving your attitude towards something. So for example, how could I get my employees to improve their attitude towards wearing their name badges? How could I get my employees to improve their attitude towards, let's say, screening? So the affective domain is to get persons to feel better. Would it be along those lines, or would it be in the psychomotor domain, which would be skills that I want them to be able to do, abilities that I want them to be able to develop, physical things that I would like them to be able to improve. So in our design, we also have to consider what the participant would learn, and we could look across the three domains, whether we are looking at the knowledge domain or the cognitive domain, the attitude domain or the affective domain, or the skills domain or the psychomotor domain. In terms of the instructional methods to be used, there are several instructional methods that can be used, which could include, the training would be lecture based. In that case, we might need multimedia for presentations, etc. It could be interactive talks, where we're just going to have small group meetings. It could be hands-on practice, where it's going to be more practical. It could be field training, where persons are going to be sent to do different training in different spaces with specific objectives, and they report on that. It could be training with equipment or computer training. It could be modeling. It could be self-study, as we talk about. So in terms of the instructional methods to be used, we have to take those into consideration. How will the participant demonstrate competency? We'll talk about that in a bit. How the learning will be transferred, we'll talk about that in a bit as well. And the other decisions related to the principles that enhance learning. Let's talk about these principles that enhance learning now. And these principles would their physiological concerns, psychological concerns, sociological concerns, environmental concerns, perceptual concerns, and emotional concerns. As the person who is providing training, how could I make the learning space better or more conducive to learning? How could I make the learning episode or the learning experience better for the learner, such that we increase the likelihood of retention, such that we increase the likelihood of transfer, such that we increase persons' motivation to be a part of the training? And from the physiological perspective, we could talk about the time of day we're going to do the training. Some persons are going to be more motivated in the morning, some in the afternoon. So we can make a determination the best time of day. We could talk about the meals that we would be providing. So if we provided meals that would add to, well, persons may not be hungry for the very least. Persons may not have to rush to prepare meals. So are you in a position to do that in your training plan, in your training budget, in your training considerations, in your training logistics? And then there's the psychological element, where you deal specifically with the type of learner, whether it's a global or analytical. Global meaning, if you could provide the big picture and persons would be comfortable, or do you need to take things apart? An impulsive learner or reflective learner, would persons be willing to try things right there in your workshop, or would you have to give them activities such that they go away and reflect on these discussions? Sociological learner, is it an individual who could be one-dimensional, or is variety required? Are these persons who would learn better alone, so they would go away with some work, or they learn better in groups? They're solitary versus social learner. Authority, do you need to quote the authority on the subject matter or point them in the direction? Or are there persons who would accept the subject matter simply because it makes sense? So these are some things that we would need to consider. Emotionally, persons with the motivation to continue with the training. Task persistence, would persons give up if things are difficult, or would they persist? In terms of the perceptual, we are talking about people's learning styles, and we identify 7 different learning styles: visual, verbal, auditory, physical, logical or mathematical, social, or solitary. So in terms of their the way they perceive information, we have to factor these as well. And of course, environmental, ensuring that the room is not too cold, the room is not too hot, the seating is appropriate, it's not uncomfortable, the lighting in the room is adequate, persons could hear, everybody could hear within the room. So these are other considerations for designing your training. And we can also talk from the perspective of the principles of learning that we would have to consider as we develop our training. And there are various principles of learning. These principles include the principle of readiness, which means that we must do the best we can to ensure that the learning space is optimal, that persons are really ready to learn. Readiness might include what we talked about, the room is prepared well, there's something to eat, the time of day is optimal. So there are certain things that you could do to ensure that you are meeting the learner halfway, and there are certain things that the learner could do to ensure that they are meeting you halfway in ensuring an optimal learning space. Principle of exercise, which means that people must have ample opportunity to interact with the material. So sometimes we think simply because we read out material or we present material or we lecture material that participants are learning. Participants must have opportunity to interact or to engage in exercises that will bring about the learning that is supposed to take place, increase the likelihood of retention as well as increase the likelihood of transference. Effect. We must pay attention to the effect. Are we doing the right things? And if we're doing the right things, are we getting the right results? Are persons learning and transferring that which we want them to do? So you have to pay attention to that principle as well, the principle of effect. Monitor what you're doing or how training is taking place. Evaluate the results and make a determination if there are changes that you should be making as you progress. There's also the principle of intensity, and the principle of intensity says the more learning approaches that we use, the better we increase the chances of persons understanding the content and being able to retain it and transfer it to the workplace. So if I am using a learning style of oral only, you're listening to me and you're not seeing these words, or you don't have the opportunity to practice, or you don't have the opportunity to discuss, I'm not creating a learning environment that takes into account the principle of intensity. The more approaches to learning I can involve in my training development or in my training design, it increases the likelihood of the effectiveness of the training. Then there's the principle of requirement, and the principle of requirement says that, well, to be redundant, every episode of learning has certain requirements. A specific outcome requirement. What are the outcomes we are attempting to achieve? As a human resource development practitioner, you must know what outcomes you are attempting to achieve. Not only must you know, but your participants must be aware of the outcomes they are attempting to achieve by the training. So you must provide these objectives. There would also be a material requirement. What are the material requirements of the training? The content, where they're going to get the support material. Is it going to require internet connectivity? Are you going to provide handouts? Are you going to provide pens and writing stationery? What would be provided? What are the material requirements, and how are you going to ensure that they are there? And then there's also a skill requirement. Persons must be able to bring certain kinds of skills to the space. If it's training, it's likely that they're going to have to be able to read at a certain level, write at a certain level, cope with what's going on within the learning space. And to the extent that you ensure that persons invited to be participants have the skills that are required to make the most of the training, or you ensure that the training is done at a level that matches the skill what these persons are bringing to the table, you ensure that the workshop is effective, that the training is effective. Then there's the principle of primacy, which says that people may require foundational understanding of certain subject matters before you expose them to maybe a little more technical or a little more difficult subject matters. So you have to ensure that the proper base is there for persons to build on in terms of the acquisition of competence, in terms of moving from the level that they are at to the level that you need them to be within the organization. There's an optimal base. And then there's the principle of recency, which talks about the closer you bring the training to the time that the organization is going to implement, the increased likelihood that they're going to retain it, it's going to be fresh in their heads, and they're going to be able to apply it. So you wouldn't want to do training in January for a project to be implemented in December. You may probably want to do the training in January, but by October, November, you do a refresher of the training such that the information is recent just before the requirement to implement. And then the final principle is the principle of freedom. And the principle of freedom says the more freely a person engages in the learning experience, the more that person would have an interest, the less they would have a mental block, the more they would be able to concentrate, the more they would be able to spend the requisite amount of time in the training versus if the opposite applies. So for example, some organizations would just choose persons from a list to send to training, and these persons may not have the interest, they may not want to go, but they are compelled to do so. And once that is the case, they would not make the most of the training because they would try to do the least they could. They may reach late for the training, they may not do the homework that is required for the reflection in order to absorb the training in the ways that they should be absorbing the training. So these are just some principles that the human resource development practitioner should be aware of and should take into account in developing the training. Another element we may want to consider is the type of learners, and we're speaking from the perspective of adult learners. And Malcolm Knowles, the guy who spent some time studying adult learners, he says an essential aspect of maturing is developing the ability to take increasing responsibility for our own lives, to become increasingly self-directed. And we have to take that into consideration with adult learners. They want that option to be self-directed. They want that option to take responsibility. And there are several principles that Malcolm Knowles shared in relation to adult learners. These principles that he talked about in relation to adult learners, they have the need to know why they're learning something. Remember, we talked about the outcome requirement. What is the outcome? What are we doing here? Why am I doing this? They have a need to be self-directed. Also, they bring more work-related experiences into the learning space. So given that, how could I allow other participants to benefit from the experiences that their peers are bringing to the learning space? So I must not just be talking. I must create the opportunities where persons could share their experiences and other persons could learn from their experiences, and they themselves too can learn from reflecting on their experiences. Adult learners also enter into the learning experience with a problem-centered approach to learning. What problems am I faced with within the organization, and how is this training going to help me solve the problem or problems with which I'm faced? And adult learners are also motivated to learn by extrinsic and intrinsic factors, which means that could be factored. They may want a certificate at the end of it, or some may not be interested in a certificate. They may simply be interested in acquiring the knowledge. Some people may want the recognition. Some people may just know, I feel good about my own self-development. So when you factor these things about adult learners into the learning space, into your design, you can now ensure a design that is more effective within the workspace. And you can now move on to developing the training. In terms of development of the training, we're just talking about the training design. Everything that we just designed or everything that we just took into account, we're now going to create the material documentation to facilitate that. So we're going to have like a description of the training or a descriptor. We're going to have course outlines or workshop outlines. We're going to have lesson plans. And lesson plans are basically the way we're going to implement the lesson. Exactly what we're going to do within the time frame that we have. The lesson plan will talk about how long we're going to deliver, the activities, the approach we're going to use. It's going to direct us to resources. It's going to contain everything. You could just Google a lesson plan and see a picture of it, see what it entails, what it looks like. We also have to create the handouts or the support material, the course notes. We're going to have to create the training aids, which might be videos that we're going to use. like I'm doing right now. I'm using videos, I'm creating a video. PowerPoint slides, I had to create PowerPoint slides that you're looking at. Case studies, if we're going to use the approach of case studies. Exercises or assignments or projects, you're going to have to identify them, create them. How you're going to assess individuals, your assessment strategy. And based on your assessment strategy, you might have exams you're going to have to create. And then, of course, you're going to have to create the training evaluation as we talked about. So development using the ADDIE model is simply saying we've done the analysis of the organization. We've designed the training that we need to carry out. Now we are developing the training. Once the training has been developed, we're now going to talk about the implementation. And the implementation of the training is simply the delivery of the training. Implementation would be, okay, we're going to have the lectures. So it's going to be at a certain space, at a certain time. You're going to deliver the lectures. You're going to have tutorials. We're going to have talks, whatever means by which we've decided that we're going to implement. We're going to implement the training. We're going to implement the activities. We're going to implement the assessments. That's basically the implementation of the training. Now, in implementing the training, there are specific things that we could pay attention to in our workshops. And Robert Gagne talks about the events of instructions, events that we should pay attention to in instructing. So we're going to conduct our workshop, we're going to deliver our training, and there are certain things that we must pay attention to. Robert Gagne talks about 9 events of instructions. So these 9 events include 1, gain the attention of participants. What could you do to gain the attention of participants before you engage in your training? So let me give you an example. I can say something like, you guys are going to be a rare group of individuals who have the ability to not just function in the way that you've been hired to function at your organization, but you would also be in a position to support your organization in improving its HR practices once you do this course. Once you do this Introduction to Human Resource Management, you're going to be in a position to be a greater asset to your employer. So I've gained your attention. To the extent that you want to be a greater asset to your employer, your attention is going to be piqued. Okay, I really want to do this. I want to be a part of this. Inform participants of the objectives. The objectives of this program is to provide individuals with a means by which they could support their organizations or any organizations calling on them in terms of the evolution of their own HR practices, in terms of their strategic HR, in terms of HR planning, in terms of recruitment, in terms of training, in terms of motivation, in terms of performance management, in terms of compensation. So these are the areas that we're going to be able to support organizations with. So I inform participants of the objective. Stimulate recall of prior learning. Some things that workshop leaders would do is tell me, do you have any experience in human resource development? Do you have any experience in training? Do you have any experience in whatever area we're discussing? And that is in an attempt to stimulate recall of what you know, to bring what you know to the space so we could build on it. Then, of course, you're going to present the content. So you gain participants' attention, you explain to them what we're about, you stimulate recall of prior learning, what they already know, and now you're going to present the content, just as I'm presenting now with a video and with slides. Provide learning guidance, help persons navigate through the content that you are providing. Talk persons through in the same way that I'm doing now. I'm talking you through, and if I think there's a difficult area, I'm spending more time on it, so I'm providing guidance and helping you learn the content. Elicit performance or practice. So sometimes I would ask you to reflect on this, to answer this question. So you're eliciting performance from your learners, just that you ensure that they are following you, they are progressing in the ways that you would want them to progress. Then, of course, you could provide feedback once you elicit performance, you would need to provide feedback. And the feedback that you're providing could be confirmatory feedback. You're confirming that, okay, you're doing what I want you to do. That's one kind of feedback. It could be corrective feedback. I'm not sure that you got it as we would have liked it to be done. Would you want to take a second look of that? So that's corrective feedback you're providing. Remedial feedback. So if you go and check out a video that I have on my YouTube channel, that is likely to point you in a better direction and give you the kind of support you need to make improvement. That's remedial feedback. Or informative feedback. So this is what you did, but this is what I prefer you should do. This is what you should do. That's informative feedback. So once you elicit performance, you must be able to provide feedback. Step 9 or event number 9, assess performance. And we talk about you could do a pre-test, find out what persons know from before, and you could do a post-test to look at, okay, this person has definitely learned. And event number 9, enhance retention and transfer to the job. Now, we are spending a long time on this video. I'm going to try to finish this video in about 45 minutes, but it's important. It's an important resource if you want to use it to assist with training at your organization. It could point you in directions of things that you may need to interact with to be better at what you do. In addition to the 9 events of instructions, there are certain principles of instructional psychology which corroborates or supports everything that we talked about here. In terms of instructional psychology, we could talk about moving from a novice to an expert, or moving from a novice to perhaps an advanced beginner. So you're not just a beginner, you are now an advanced beginner. You're still a beginner, or you're acquiring competence, or you're refining that competence and becoming proficient, and you progress to being an expert. And as human resource practitioners, as workshop leaders, as facilitators, we must know that a focus on the acquisition of competence as opposed to a desire to simply transmit information carries the potential for greater success and requires a greater responsibility on the part of the facilitator. So you could decide, I'm just going to do the training, I'm going to read what I'm supposed to read, I'm going to present what I'm supposed to present, but that's not the be-all and end-all of your job, and it's an irresponsible approach. An approach that is more responsible is a focus on the acquisition of competence. How do I move this individual from a novice to becoming more proficient in the field? And Glaser talks, similar to Gagné, of some approaches. Describe the learning goal to be attained. What are our objectives? And analyze the initial state of the learner. Stimulate recall. Identify the process that would allow the participant to gain competence. Present the material. Monitor the process to determine the progress and whether alternative techniques should be used. Assessment and to what extent we need to do something differently. Key pillars. In terms of motivation, some of the things I can do: set an appropriate tone for the training. Let persons know how important the training is. If you guys listen to what I'm saying, you could be an asset. You set that kind of motivation. You set an appropriate level of concern for the training. You solve the what's in it for me. Lots of persons ask that question, what's in it for me? For you is an opportunity to say to your employer or potential employer, not only can I function in terms of this job that I'm applying for, but I'm also skilled in human resource management. In terms of reinforcement, you have different kinds of reinforcement that you could provide to your learner. Positive reinforcement, and positive reinforcement is used to encourage desirable or correct behavior. So somebody is now applying what you encouraged them, what you taught them. You could say, hey, good, thumbs up, nice work, I like what you're doing. And then there's negative reinforcement, which is used to extinguish undesirable behavior. So based on what we discussed in the training, you should no longer be operating at this level. So you're trying to negatively reinforce or get rid of behaviors that are undesirable. In terms of retention, one of the things you want to do is maintain a decent intensity throughout the learning experience. So you don't want to start off hot and sweaty and persons are interested and enthusiastic, and then as you progress to the training, you just simmer down to a monotonous type of approach where it makes it difficult for people to maintain high levels of alertness and enthusiasm. So in order to facilitate retention, you could use a variety of approaches such that you hold people's interest, and from time to time you give them assignments that would allow them to spend a little more time focused on the material that you're presenting. And then of course, in terms of transference, you don't want the training to just finish in the room that it is taking place, and you want persons to transfer that their skills and knowledge and abilities to the workplace. So you want persons to be able to do those things that they were taught to do, and you want persons to discontinue doing those things that you've discouraged. And as a result of that, you could have activities that would continue at the workplace. You could have field training, you could have reflective exercises that allow for persons to transfer that training. In some cases, you could have the training in the actual space where the person would be required to implement the training. Finally, we're going to talk about evaluation, and we're just going to talk about Kirkpatrick's 4 levels of evaluation. Evaluation is essentially the systematic collection of information about the training in relation to the goals and objectives that were set. It informs the extent to which the training was effective. 4 levels of evaluation. 1, reaction of the student, what they thought and felt about the training. So what do our participants think about the training? How do they feel about the training? And everything about the training. Was the room comfortable? Was the food good? Did the facilitator speak too fast or too slow? Was the training important? So the reaction of the participant to the training. You could do a questionnaire at the end of your training to gather that information. It would help improve the way you do training going forward. 2, the learning, the resulting increase in knowledge and capability. So you could have like a pre-test, as I mentioned, and a post-test. You could have a questionnaire that you ask persons to complete before and after, or you could simply have the one that you ask them to complete after, because the pre-test might have been more conversational. Okay? You could look at the level of behavior change, the extent to which the behavior and capability improvement, the extent of behavior and capability improvement and implementation or application. So did the employees' behavior change when they got back to the workplace? Did they become more competent? Did they improve in terms of their capability, in terms of their application? So you can look at behavior change. And then the final level is results, the effect on the business or environment resulting from the trainee's performance. So they like the training, okay, good, that's the reaction. They really learned because they passed the test. Their behavior change. Now you're looking to see if the behavior change really improved business or improved quality of work life or improved performance in the way you would have expected prior to doing the training. So these are the 4 levels of evaluation that we talked about. So to recap, we talk about the fact that once you bring persons into the organization, you're going to have to provide them with the requisite KSAOs, knowledge, skills, abilities, and other attributes that would be important. And in doing that, training and development is an important function, HR function. We talked about ways that you could improve. One of the ways you could improve is by using the systematic approach to training. And using the systematic approach to training, we talk about being involved in the analysis of the organization, analyzing the organization to see what's working, what's not, what could be corrected by training. Once you've done that, you need to design your training. Once you've done that, you need to develop your training. Once you've done that, you need to implement your training. and then you need to evaluate your training. So I wanted to spend no more than about 45 minutes, but I'm on perhaps exact 50 minutes. So hope you guys benefit from this video. See you in the next video.